Next up, we want to look at the Avalonia XAML in general. So these are some fundamentals that you need to learn in order to properly understand Avalonia. Now, Avalonia is heavily based on XAML, which is an XML markup styling. And even though there's more to that, it's a huge part of Avalonia. So let's just take a look. Here's the official documentation to go alongside this video. And we've already covered this in a few previous videos, but let's just take a look specifically. What we want to understand is this general format. Anywhere you see AXAML as the extension, you can see in here we're going to be dealing with specifically taking a look at the window, which is perfect in our instance for the example application because we have a window. You've understood how we've made this, and we just want to really understand at the moment this kind of structure at the top. There's a lot of stuff in here, and we want to know what's going on. So in any XML-based documentation, it works with attributes, which are these things inside of the square brackets after the first definition. So window is the definition here, and then these are the attributes. And you can see we've got this XML-NS, which stands for XML namespace. This is, again, not necessarily specific to Avalonia. This is an XML concept. We define them typically with URIs. This is how they generally work, with kind of fake websites. So these aren't normally an actual website. They don't need to be. They can be just pseudo links. But they're unique in the sense of when the engine below this parses it, it understands what it all means. So what does all that mean? All we care about is that when we are in an Avalonia XAML file, we need to specify a few concrete things. The first is the main XML namespace. What this tells the entire document below is how to understand if, for example, stack panel is even a valid thing to write, because you can make rules inside of XML that say, oh, inside of this, I only expect, for example, one top level element. So the thing when we type in, say, button here, that errors out, this error is coming from the fact that it understands that we are an Avalonia namespace here. So we bake in rules in the background. If we were to delete that, you can see deleting it alone means that it doesn't even know what a window is because it doesn't know where to find that, what it means, where it comes from. So everything about Avalonia then, everything that's custom to it, is simply unable to resolve. It doesn't know what it is or where to go. So this is just the key. This is the very top thing that tells then the system that Avalonia needs to parse these values. And all these ones that become available, like design, have now come from the fact that it's understood the basics of Avalonia. What we ultimately have here are namespace declarations. They are using statements for the most part in code behind. And by doing these, we are telling the code behind of this XAML window where to find Avalonia elements. This one is for the Avalonia stuff, and this one is just for the original WinFX XAML, if you will. This is a lot of what it's based off. So this gives it the scheme. This is part of what gives it the ability to have a class, which is a code behind to this XAML, data types, and so on. So if we were to remove X, obviously these two wouldn't be found, but if we were to then remove those two, and with that one gone, scroll down, you can see the code behind is now missing because it doesn't know where to find the code behind. And that's because, as part of this schema, it understands things like code behind files. And then beyond these two critical ones, we have some markup compatibility, which is again built in, and it's just ensuring that the text we write in here follows standards that are going to work across a broader range of things. This D is a design time. Again, you can see all the origins here coming from Blend, which is an old school Microsoft UI before we had the more modern stuff. So all of these, the XML namespace, the X, the design time, and the compatibility, these are all completely standard. Really, we want to move this down to here because these are the 4 standards. These are like the requirements for all XAMLs for Avalonia. After that, if we put a space in, this is one more namespace defining a view model that isn't strictly required if we don't use a view model. This is like user code stuff. And then these are all setting properties. So all of these are setting properties or attributes as they're called. This is a custom namespace using statement, and this is the required usings. So if we wanted to map that to code behind, these using statements, these kind of required using statements, would be the equivalent of kind of doing this. Then the custom using would be us doing, say, our own controls like this, for example, if we wanted to use something we'd made using Avalonia controls dot, say, ViewModels. That's the equivalent of doing this, where it's, user code adding the using. And then these properties, if you will, are the equivalent of setting properties like this on things in your code. So that's the kind of way to split all of these just attributes that are in a single line into a bit more meaningful. If we go inside the window, for example, and have a stack panel, what we have here is a content control. So this is a stack panel that we are adding, and this is an attribute on XAML, but it's ultimately a property of the stack panel. So attributes and properties can be used synonymously in XAML, really, in my eyes. This is technically an attribute in XAML, but it maps to a property of the control here. Something we haven't really done in this sample application yet is binding. So that's a topic on its own. We have the namespace ready, so VM will link into ViewModels. And if we look in our code, we have a view model, a main window view model, and it just has greeting at the moment. So if we wanted to bind to that, we could say in the status text down here, we can open curly braces inside of text, and we can now type the special syntax binding and a space. And now you can see it understands that the data context is a main window view model. That comes from this definition here, telling us that the data context of this window is of type main window. So when we type this binding in, that all automatically resolves to expecting a main window view model. And now after the binding, when we put a space, this is now going to look for properties inside of the main window view model. And you can see here in bold, it's found the only one, which is greeting. And then it's set a bunch of other things that we can set inside of the binding itself as well. But by default, if we just put a text in, it defaults to the path. So it's the same thing as doing binding space path equals and then greeting. It's just a shorthand way of doing that. You don't need to specify path equals. And now you can see in the UI, it says welcome to Avalonia. So binding is its whole separate thing, but that's how you ultimately do it. The code behind is when you see in your Solution Explorer, you've got a view and you've got this expandability to go to a code behind file. In the actual folder, you can see that they aren't actually magically embedded. They are just two files with the same name, but one has a .cs extension. But in the Solution Explorer, this then gets nicely embedded to show that it's effectively an underlying linked code behind file. So that comes from, as we understood it before, this ability to have the inbuilt WinFX namespace, and setting up this special class property is what then tells it where to find it. So this is the full resolved namespace of this class, which is here. So we are in the namespace Avalonia controls.view, and it's called main window. And that's what that is formed from. That then means when we have a click and it's trying to find something in the code behind, that's how it then resolves to expecting to find that exact name of a method on a class. So it's all linked for us. Now, the way of doing custom namespaces like this is very easy. It says using colon and then names. So that maps very easily to exactly how we're expected to see it in C#. In the days of WPF, we didn't have this nice syntax. And instead we had an old school one, which if we look on the documentation, you can see here, instead of specifying just the nice text saying using, we had to use clr-namespace colon, or if the namespace was in a different assembly, we'd have to use clr-namespace colon, the assembly name dot the namespace semicolon, and then the assembly name. So it was a lot more complicated to do references. Thanks to Avalonia, we now have this nice, clean using statement. So that's the XAML structure as a wide overview that gives you ideas of where else you might want to go. As in the documentation, if you want to see how to do code without XAML, you can do entirely code behind structures and make the entire window without XAML at all, if you prefer. I wouldn't recommend it, but that's an option. It's good maybe to learn and understand the links between XAML and code behind. Article on specifically how code behind works here in a bit more detail. You can take a look at UI composition, which we'll come to as we go anyway, or we can dive into data binding, which is all model view model stuff, or you can even dive into custom controls. So depends where you want to take it next.